this is a really important story to tell, and to understand this is particularly now, because, as I was saying before, race is central to our story. Race, race, race. And a lot of people don't like that. And a lot of people don't want to hear about it.
Welcome to the End Game, where we discuss race and sports. We have a great show today. My name is Tom Shanahan, and my co-host is Herman Bowles. Herman is a West Point grad, retired colonel, and a very highly honored and successful American businessman, honored many times among top African-American businessmen. But what I really value about having Herman on with me as a co-host is he was the first Black quarterback at his high school in 1973, the fall of 73. So he observed so much about race relations in America. Herman, how you doing?
I'm hanging in there, a little cold. I've been on the road for 13 days and got back in town last night to do your show.
Great. And then really excited to have our guest tonight, Osahan Tongo, producer and director of the Emmy Award-winning documentary, The Indelible Jimmy Ray, which aired, Osahan's a producer director for NFL 360, and it first aired on the NFL Network. Congratulations on that award, Osahan. Embrace it there for us for a second.
Thank you. Yeah, and I just came home with the hardware. Pretty happy and pretty proud about being able to tell this story and share this story and witness history and stand next to history going through this whole process. So it's been an honor and pleasure.
And that was in New York on Monday night, the 44th annual Sports Emmys. And let's watch a little bit here of the announcement of the award and the winner.
And the Emmy goes to?
It's an honor to tell a story of Jimmy Ray, a trailblazer who helped shape the culture for Black quarterbacks and Black coaches in the National Football League.
In one word, I'd describe Jimmy Ray as iconic.
Impactful. Intelligent.
He's the first Black quarterback from the South to win a national title.
Jimmy Ray is tough.
Congratulations, Osahan. I was telling you earlier that I've watched a lot of Academy Awards and Emmys, and you watch and you see who's going to win, and you don't really feel the suspense like I did for your award. I was so proud of you and Jimmy Ray for winning that award. Talk about the emotions of hearing your name, and then take us backstage too.
Well, I feel like that's because you're part of the story. You're a big part of the story. You help kind of, pave the way and like give us the ground points of the story of what was going on at Michigan State and giving us tentpole events and some of the emotions and feels. So like, I want everyone that was part of this project to feel ownership in it, because it takes a village. It's not just my award. There's thousands of people who have helped me get to this point, and then hundreds of people that I worked with on the project. So but the experience at the award show was really humbling in the sense that going through the project process, we brought, Jimmy was up there. Me and Jimmy are going to the award show, and we're riding in the black car before, and we got our tuxes on, and I'm trying to, make sure that there's not too many folds and my zipper's not open. And I was like, I think it's so weird, but the one thing I said, I was like, I don't know whether to listen to jazz, meditation music, or Drake. Like, I feel like I need to listen to pump up, stunty music, or should I listen to something that'll cool me down, because I was getting nerves. And just going through that process, taking the pictures, doing the red carpet with Jimmy, there was moments in time where I just looked at Jimmy and I'm like, I'm so glad he's getting this shine right now.
Yeah.
Because it's like not enough people knew this story, not enough people knew. And then when we're on stage, I get to look back at him and I see him smiling and giving him,
Exactly.
and I'm just like, yeah, that's the real reason you should do it. I think my heart in it, especially when I'm meeting all of the subjects that I work with, I become family with them. Jimmy's taking me to his childhood home and to his old stomping ground, and he's like, I don't go up to Michigan State past October. So you got me flying up to Michigan State in the cold? All right.
That's right.
He's the 100-year-old, lady that Miss Pauline Adams. So I got to sit with him. So I mean, I'm just humbled by the whole process, being able to tell the story. Getting this is just, is icing on top of the cake, but really being nested in witnessing history with revolutionary people with the kindest hearts is the real goal and the real gem.
Right. Herman, your thoughts?
Fantastic. And I have to admit that Tom brought Jimmy Ray to my attention. And that is in a lot of ways bad on my part, as well as our education system. And I say that because we're not teaching about, characters in history that we should all be proud of. But also, on the question I have for you is, you're an athlete, and an athlete, you have to visualize the right thing happening, and then you go and execute, and that's all you think about. Had you ever visualized you're stepping up on that stage and collecting that image?
Oh, I did. So the hotel was down the street from Central Park, and I jogged. I worked out in the morning, I jogged to Central Park, and I sat and meditated, and I just visualized myself walking on stage, grabbing the trophy, shaking hands, smiling, taking it. And when I took a breath, there was a moment I paused, and someone was like, "Oh, you forgot what you were gonna say." I was like, "No, I was taking it all in, because this is a moment I had dreamed about." Like someone wrote a text to me and showed it to me. They were like, "You're going to be nominated and win multiple awards." And this was 2015 or something like that. And I was like, "Yeah, but I'm ahead of each other." And she's like, "Believe it, claim it." I'm like, "Okay, cool, I'll claim it." And I think this is that seed planted coming to fruition.
So you think of all the people that came to watch you play football when you started at Georgia Tech, and they came out on Saturday afternoon, and they didn't see much of what happened really starting on Sunday morning with the injury report, the weightlifting, the sessions during the week, to have that product on Saturday afternoon. Tell us what the comparable is. And I looked at your resume, and someone that wants to make it in your field, you had a heck of a lot of jobs and gopher jobs and all of these types of things where you went out and did it. So that's the tantamount to that Sunday through Friday night preparation for a game. How is it that you were able, did your sports and football discipline help you keep your eye on the prize?
Yes, 100%. Well, I was telling my dad earlier today, and we talked about the fact that, I started playing football in high school, probably like I started, but like high school, I'm all state, all American alternate. I get recruited by all these places. I go to Georgia Tech. First week of pads, I tear my ACL. And then I have to go through that whole process of fighting back and dealing with that, coach issues, switching positions, undersized DN, and then I win ACC championship, my face is on the side of the bus and all that stuff. So there's these peaks and valleys, and then I go through not knowing what I want to do after football because I had my hip injury and I didn't go to the league, and I'm dealing with the shame of that and all that. And then I go into marketing, the next thing you know, I'm like working at CNN, which would be someone's dream, it wasn't mine. So I was like, okay, well, I need to find my way, find my path. And I went to Greece, I worked abroad for a couple months, and then I was like, okay, I know I want to do film. I applied, didn't get in, applied again, got in, waitlisted, come in with a chip on my shoulder, go through that, excel, finally get things. So it's like these, I was talking to my dad about how I've succeeded at every level of everything that I've tried, but it hasn't felt that way. It's felt grueling throughout most of the process of it before I got to getting the ring or getting the trophy or getting whatever it is. And we were talking about falling in love with the process. And the process is learning something new. The process is humbling yourself before God and before others to learn and to soak up knowledge. And I think my part of my process was the reason it took so long, well, in my eyes, because I'm 34 now, and I wish I had this 5 years ago, but the reason it quote unquote took so long is because I had to go the full route. I had to learn everything I could. I had to learn how to do sound design so that I can give sound design notes. I had to learn how to do coloring so I could do coloring notes. Those were 17 different jobs that I had before I got here.
Yeah, Herman, you mentioned about not knowing much about Jimmy Ray, and that is the fault of the media. In the 1960s, the media avoided race. And so these milestones that Duffy Daugherty was accomplishing with his Underground Railroad throughout the 1960s was the first fully integrated rosters. Jimmy Ray is a black quarterback, George Webster and Clinton Jones as team captains, and also George Webster and Charlie Thornhill as linebackers, Jimmy Ray as a quarterback, when back in those days, the fear was a black man couldn't lead or wasn't smart enough to play a leadership position. So yeah, there was a long void of telling this story. And that's what I tried to tell the story the best I can in Ray of Light. And I have an even deeper story coming up in my upcoming book, The Right Thing to Do. But I felt like I'd been beating my head against the wall trying to get this story because it's not accepted in the mainstream media because the 1970 USC Alabama game, which is 99.9% fiction, the civil rights impact, I should say, has so entrenched, and Bear Bryant is so beloved. That's the only story that editors want to hear. So when I got the call from Osahan saying he was taking on this project and doing his research, I was just so relieved. And one of the things that Osahan told me that I thought was real interesting is being a guy in his 30s, and also Emmanuel Sanders, the narrator at the beginning there, the video I should have mentioned, you guys are in your 30s. And so you were born after the civil rights movement. And you were intrigued to learn about what all these people went through back in the 50s and 60s. Talk about all that enlightenment that you gained.
I mean, I went to school, so I lived all over, right? I grew up mostly in Naperville, Illinois, suburbs of Chicago, and I was able to earn a scholarship. Oh, you gotta unmute. What did you say?
So, Han, I said, so that people don't know, Naperville is a very nice suburb of Chicago. It's not just a suburb.
Yeah, it's a very nice suburb of Chicago. I mean, and it's a very white suburb of Chicago. And, grew up proper, preppy, our public schools ranked one of the top schools in the country, right? Like most of the people go to college, right? So, but I also grew up in a small subset of Black people within that community. When I went to college, I was like, I need to get out of the cold, and then also wanted to be in a place that had more diversity. So choosing Atlanta, choosing Georgia Tech was an opportunity for me to explore that. And when I get there, I mean, the contrast of what was going on from my home. I mean, there was guys who had 2 separate proms in 2008. It's like Fitzgerald, Georgia. They're like, yeah, Black prom and a white prom. You can't go to the white prom. I'm like, it's 2008. You're still doing it? Yeah. Yeah, we're still doing that. I mean, I met Eddie McShann, who he was the first Black quarterback at Georgia Tech, and he paved the way for a lot of us in 1970, right? So learning about them and seeing, okay, what's the what's the differences? What are the, like, what are the same things? How can I actually sit down with a quote unquote grandfather and like listen to the story, was important. But to be honest, the editor, Johnny Orphanopoulos, he found the story about Duffy, and I forgot where he found it, but he was like, hey, we need to read this book, Ray of Light. I think this could be a really good story. So when I got the job last year, I dug into the book and I was like, oh, this is fascinating. So we had Troy Vincent, who is a mentor of mine, and he's the head of football operations. Jimmy is his advisor. So we had a straight tie-in to the NFL, and then so we wanted to frame it around Jimmy and how his story hasn't been told, especially because he has this tie-in to being one of the first Black coordinators in the league, and mentoring Tony Dungy, and being a hero for Tony Dungy and other Black coaches. So it gave us the opportunity to talk about the Black coach situation with Brian Flores and the lawsuit and all these different things, and not and do it in a graceful way, because we're focusing on the grace of Jimmy Ray and what could be, and like the blue sky is the best case scenario, and everybody can inference from the negative of that what should be done and what's not being done. So you have two of the classiest coaches in the history of the game talking about what needs to be happening. You should listen.
What I enjoyed most about watching the film when it first came out was you treated Jimmy Ray as having the impact of a head coach, not just a guy who didn't get his fair chance to be a head coach, because there's other people that fit in that category. But Jimmy impacted so many coaches, and you don't have to go any farther than Tony Dungy saying it. Tony's in the Pro Football Hall of Fame as a coach. Talk about how you did your research and you did your interviews, and behind the camera, how you started to shape that story and make it more than Jimmy Ray didn't get a chance. Jimmy Ray impacted quarterbacks and Black coaches.
If you look at things, everything that you see is what it is in the absence of it. The void is, like, when we talk about the void of him not having, right, we're also talking about what he has accomplished. Like you're not saying to Osan Tago, oh man, you didn't make it to be head coach. I was never assistant coach. I was never water boy. Like, it's not gonna come up in the conversation. You're not saying that to Joe Schmo either. So when we talk about Jimmy Ray, you talk about the endurance that he has to keep on pushing on and go for, and I think one of the things is he was of service. He was of service to the players. He was of service to his team. He was of service to everyone he came across. And I think that's the beautiful contribution that exalted him, right? It's like, if you are of service, to be a king, you must be a servant first, right? So he's a servant leader. And I think with that methodology and that mindset, he was able to rise and not think about himself as much. But when we're making the film, I'm just asking people what they think about him. I asked his teammates, I asked his teammates in high school, his teammates in college, these Hall of Fame players, Dickerson, all of them. They're like, I didn't even know that much about his playing days. I knew that, but I mean, as a coach, he changed my life. Tony Gonzalez, same thing. He gave me hope. He instilled hope in me. And that's what you really want, right? Like that's what a coach embodies, is the person who can lead you through adversity and change and help mold your character. Because football is so fleeting. It is so short. It's such a small modicum of your life, but then the reality of it is a microcosm of the reality that is. And who you become after football is based on the habits and the character that you've formed on the field and in the locker room. So if you like that, that's important.
Yeah. So as you think about the youth of today, and I call you sort of a sandwich generation, right? I was right behind Jimmy Ray and had many of the experiences that he talked to you about in the film, from not being able to go to the movie theater, the water fountains being a certain way, Of course, the Emmett Till situation that was really fresh in the minds of all Black men in the South at that point. And then, my generation, a little more free, obviously, opportunities to go a lot of places to exhibit your talents and hopefully getting a great education in the process. And then your generation came and, you guys kind of solidified it. And it's no big deal to see a Black quarterback now. It's no big deal to see a Black defensive end. No big deal to see a Black captain of the team. And not that we want complacency, but what's your message to that next generation coming up behind you, where Jimmy Ray kind of was a trailblazer and we all stand on his shoulders, okay, in many, many ways. And then your contemporaries came along and kind of kept it going. What's your message to the next generation out there?
Well, before I answer this, I want to know, what was your message when you were coming up? Like when you were going into the place right after the Jimmy Rays, what did you take from them and what did you pass on? Were you conscious?
As I said earlier, I did not know the Jimmy Ray story. When I met Tom, I was under the impression that after USC with Sam DeBam Cunningham came to Tuscaloosa and beat Alabama, the folklore is that's when Bear Bryant came out. And by the way, I got a letter from Bear Bryant. I wasn't recruited. I got a form letter from Alabama, fill out these stats. That was it. And by the way, I went to West Point and played at West Point. So we didn't know about that. And then we get the story of Bear Bryant and how, magnanimous he was, that he wanted to win, and Adolph Rupp and all of these coaches, if they could win with talent that made their supporters support them, they would do it. So this was nothing more than market supply and demand, right? So things got better. And so one of my contemporaries that I actually played against was Condridge Holloway. And I don't know if you know Condridge Holloway.
Yeah.
Know that name. He and I were in the same area in North Alabama, and he and I know Tom is aware of this. Alabama recruited him, but they're going to make him a defensive back or a receiver, and he wanted to play quarterback. So Tennessee told him he could play quarterback, and he went and did it, and was certainly he's like 2 years ahead of me, and that was kind of what it is. And then a fellow like me, and this is where I was asking that question about what do you tell the next generation? On the one hand, you have this hope that you can either make it to the NFL or the NBA, et cetera, et cetera. But look, you're an educated man. You went to Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech's a great school. The odds are against you, big time, no matter how good you are, whether it's the talent aspect of it, or whether it's like you, the injury aspect of it. So the issue that I'm thinking about and what was embedded in me is use your athletic skills as a means to an end. And that was one of the reasons I decided to go to West Point, for example, because I knew the education and then what the possibilities were afterwards. And for me, it all came true. Okay. And you certainly could have gone other places, but you chose a place with a high academic standards. My wife's nephew is Raheem, is head of the School of Engineering at Georgia Tech, African-American.
Wow.
Okay. He went to school at undergrad from North Carolina A&T and HBCU. Right. Got all this graduate work, Georgia State and then Georgia Tech. And now he is head of the engineering department at the engineering, one of the top engineering schools in the nature. So I guess I'm asking in terms of that messaging, and my prejudice was what I told you earlier. Take the sports, use it as a means to an end. Because if you win the lottery and you happen to be good enough, there's so many, 800, 400 something kids got drafted in the last couple of weeks. And, 20% of them are going to be on a roster next year.
Right.
If that.
That's.
I was going to say, Herman, you should tell a story about how important it was to you when Gary Steele, the first Black letterman at West Point in 1966, not that long ago.
No, not that well. Yeah.
You've told me about how for you to see someone who looked like you, that made a big impact.
Made it a big impact when he came to my hometown and, spent time and it's so great that, and do you know his daughter? Do you know his daughter, Sage Skill? Are you aware of that?
They still? Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so her dad was the first Black letterman at West Point. And he also recruited me to West Point. And on the freshman team we had at the time, he was also a coach of mine. So when you look at, I'm certain Georgia Tech did something similar. Every week I got a letter talking about some former Army football player, from Dwight Eisenhower, who'd been a manager, to the CEO of this company, CEO of that company. And it just got to me and got me to thinking long term. Yeah, I want to be part of athletics, but there's something after athletics. And so the message that I got was use your athletic skills as a means to an end.
Yeah, yeah.
So what's your message to the group behind you?
That was one of the recruiting points for Georgia Tech. They said 1 out of every 5 people, Georgia Tech students becomes a millionaire, and it's not always through football. And that was one of the things. And they're like, it's mostly not through football, right? And I was like, wait, okay, so out of this team of, with walk-ons, it's like 100 people on this team. You mean to tell me only 3 of them might get drafted this year? And there's 25 people each class that were top everything in their state, and they're not going to get drafted. Okay, well, cool. I think reality hit me. I was 240, I was 6'3", 240 going into college. Like, I was built like a tank. And then when I was in the training room, icing my knee, I'm looking around at all the guys that came back, and they're just trying to figure out life. All the seniors that didn't quite get drafted, and it's just like, oh, I could be one of them. That's a reality.
Well, you know what? I want to interrupt you just for 1 second. You graduated in 4 years and played intercollegiate Division I football.
Yes.
That's an accomplishment, because a lot of people don't know what it takes to play intercollegiate football.
And that's a testament to my parents. I think I played soccer, I was a swimmer growing up, I did all these chess club, and my parents just wanted to keep us active. But as far as like when I got good at football, they said, hey, if you get less than a B, we're pulling you out. Like, if my GPA had to be high. So my subset of schools was the Notre Dames and the Stanfords and the Boston College Dukes, the Ivies, the Michigan States of the world, right? Like some very academic schools. So when I was whittling it down, my parents are like, okay, you can't turn down Harvard and Cornell and then not go to a good school. Like, you have to go to a good school. That's our bargain. Like, we know you want a full ride, we know you want to go to the pros, but like, you're gonna turn down Harvard? Okay. So that was part of it. But like, I have a less eloquent way of saying, use it as a means to an end. I always said pimp the system, because the system's pimping you. And I look at it and I'm like, they're pimping us for our bodies are being used, they're poked and prodded and looked at, and fans are touching you and loving you and all that stuff while you're here, and when you're gone, they don't love you anymore. You're a distant thought. And it's like, how do you leverage that? And one of the things that I tell young players, I wasn't a superstar that I wanted to be, but I still was able to go on LinkedIn and meet John Brock, who's the CEO of Coca-Cola, and he said, come to my office and have a Coke with me. I know who you are. I was like, okay. So I'm sitting there and he's like, hey, we're chatting it up. 45 minutes go by and he's like, I don't know if I can hire you anything that you want here, but somebody at Rubbermaid Newell, I'll just call them. I'll call my friend over there. I'll call my friend over at Home Depot and try and get you in a management training program. What do you want to do? I got you. Because we built a rapport, because I was able to leverage, pimp the system, or just leverage a relationship within the system, right? I was able to go to Greece because there was a program at Georgia Tech that I couldn't go into while I was playing. But when I finished, there was one more year eligibility for the program, and I got to work abroad in Greece because I went to a Georgia Tech like school. So I think for me, I was always looking at, okay, they have this schedule for you, and then what else is on campus? What else can I do? Who else do I need to meet so that I can find people of similar interests and pique my curiosity? But be curious. My thing was be curious.
So one of the things, and I think Tom's aware of this, the company I'm with, and again, we developed Technology Square where you hung out, I'm certain, from time to time.
Oh my
But
God.
we purchased Roger Staubach's company for original price of $750 million. And there was an earnout that got probably 200 or 300 more $million there. And Roger introduced me to Emmett Smith. And Emmett, matter of fact, I was in Dallas last weekend and just happened to be at an establishment, ran into Emmett and was talking to him. But when I first met Emmett and we were going back and forth, I said, you know, Emmett, if I had your notoriety and my know-how, you know, I'd really be dangerous. He said, well, tell you what, Herman, I'm going to keep my notoriety and I'm going to get your know-how. And I'm going to. So I think that's a perfect example of Emmett being someone that had it all. And of course, he had a great mentor in Roger Staubach, right? And what is it that you do to set yourself up after the lights go out? And that's just so important.
When the stadium is buzzing, it's so loud. And that silence is just as loud. That silence when no one's clapping for you is just as loud. When you're in your apartment trying to figure out life, when you're dealing with whatever injuries you walked away with, it is quiet, it's definitely silent. And I think part of the thing I've also found too is part of the know-how is from not being Emmett Smith, right? Like part of my like talent or use of curiosity was because I wasn't getting the playing time as much. So I'm like, my brain is bored, I'm irritated, I'm frustrated. How can I vent? How can I learn more? How can I do these different things? I know my path is going to be different than I thought it was. And I think knowing and leveraging who you are and your personality and all these different things are great, but also understanding your situation is unique to you because of your circumstance. Like I am a filmmaker that can tell stories and empathize with sadness because I've experienced sadness. I've inherited a certain amount of grief through my own personal story. So now I can sit with Jimmy and listen to his story and not try and rush out of it. We talk about the emotional elasticity. How can I paint with all the colors of the emotional rainbow, right? So I got to be able to paint with the deepest, darkest blues if I want to color with yellow and red, right? So if I'm sitting here and I'm in the edit and I'm like, well, we don't need that, it's making me uncomfortable subconsciously, then it's not going to be as strong as a piece. Because I didn't want to hear all the details on Emmett Till, but there's people who don't know the details of Emmett Till. We need to leave that in.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So being conscious of your implicit bias and your bandwidth to deal with the emotionality and the colors of it and the octaves of your emotional scale is important.
Yeah, including Emmett Till was very important, I thought, because you were starting out when Jimmy was a young man, what the world was like for him. You mentioned earlier, Eddie McCashin, the first Black quarterback at a major school in the South. That was in 1970. And that kind of relates to what I've said about USC and Alabama, the 1970 game. What people don't understand is that the myth behind the 1970 USC Alabama game was created 20 years after the game was played. If you read the stories in the papers, the next day it was considered a rout, nothing more, just a simple one-sided game. Nothing about race being a big impact. And I've got a story that I've got ready. I'm hoping I can sell it to a magazine as a freelance pitch. But I did a little more research, and what I found out is that same day, 1970, that USC and Alabama played, Stanford played at Arkansas. Stanford was ranked number 10. Arkansas was number 4. This was a big game. And guess what happened in that game? A black quarterback, a black fullback named Hillary the Shocker Shockley dominated. Sound familiar? It's Sam Cunningham. But nobody made up a myth about Hillary Shockley 20 years later. And also in Sports Illustrated, that's the game they covered. Dan Jenkins, the legendary Dan Jenkins, he covered that game, not USC and Alabama. He saw that game as more significant.
Why do you think that story is so prominent?
And then let me finish. Let me get back to Eddie McMaster. In the roundup, they mentioned Eddie McMaster as the first black quarterback in the South. And there's nothing about the racial impact of USC and Alabama. So, but because this myth was successfully spread 20 years later, it's entrenched, and you can't go, I know this from experience, I can't go to editors and say, hey, here's the real story. Michigan State, throughout the 60s, helping open the door for Jerry Levias at SMU, for Darrell Hill at Maryland, for James Owens at Auburn 1 year before Alabama recruited his first black player, for Lester McLean at Tennessee, for Wilbur Hackett at Kentucky. You mentioned Wilbur Hackett in the film. All these things happened before USC Alabama, which made the USC Alabama game possible to be played without incident. And I go into all of this in my book when it comes out. And I keep looking for that tripwire to get more national attention for it, because for the most part, the editors don't believe it. And so that's where I'm at. And that's the my self-serving satisfaction with your story.
But do you feel like they don't believe it, or do they feel like it's not sexy enough for them to tell at this point in time? Or like, what is the allure of the USC? Is it because Bear Bryant is such a big name? What is what is the real allure?
Yeah, the Bear Bryant mystique, that he manipulated events. They just like telling the story about Bear Bryant.
Because Bear Bryant doesn't like that story. Because
Bear Bryant never talks about it.
He looks racist in that story.
Pardon me?
Bear Bryant he looks bad in the story. He doesn't like that. And he was sending people to Michigan State. So I don't understand why Bear Bryant.
And that's not true. He didn't send anybody to Michigan State.
He wasn't.
But people have this broad general story about Bear Bryant, the magnanimous Bear Bryant, the benevolent segregationist. And they love the story, and they don't want to hear anything else that somebody the lesser than Bear Bryant played a bigger role.
Yeah,
I know. In fact, I wanted to ask you this question, getting back about you and Emmanuel being in your 30s. One of my pitches to a major network person, a name that everybody would recognize, I'm not going to say it, everybody would recognize it, is he said his younger audience wouldn't understand Michigan State's story. And that just blew my mind. I wanted to send him back an email and said, well, educate them. And I've never come across anybody to educate the public into your story on Jimmy Ray.
I mean, it's been an honor. It's been an honor to sit with everybody and really learn the story. I think that's, for me, I just talked to Baba Pisa yesterday. That's now my new brother for life, Clinton Jones, and being able to sit with all these guys and hear their stories. And then you see the vintage footage of them. I was like, they look just like me and my friends. They got jokes. Ernie Barnes, or what's the name? Ernie Pastor.
And Ernie Pastor, yeah.
Ernie Pastor, he's like, Jimmy gave me his number and his phone. His name was Homeboy. I said, what do you call him Homeboy? He's like, man, he's from my hometown. That's my homeboy. And I'm like, that's something I would say, that like, we're the same person. He's just got more wisdom, right? Like, I think that was a big thing for me and Emmanuel, and even getting Emmanuel up to date on the story was, hey, this guy's just like me. He's coming from the same situation, because like, we still deal with the microaggressions, not just because like broad strokes, like I saw Obama, but I grew up not thinking Obama was possible. I grew up with people saying, yeah, right, there'll never be a Black president. And even after it, you deal with everything that's going on. So we're not blind to the situation and what happened. I mean, sad enough to say, I was learning about Martin Luther King at the same time I was seeing Tupac and Biggie die. So I was like, well, if I'm gonna be great, probably gonna die young, because that's what happens. It's just like it was a very morbid thought, but it got me to the point where I was like, okay, well, I got to do whatever I got to do fast or whatever. But I mean, we're not. That's not too far away from us. Like some of my friends' parents are Black Panthers and stuff like that. It's
Yeah.
like we're still the generation down from that, and some of us are the generation that our grandparents were just so beat down. They're like, "Don't do that." I remember being on campus and teammates being like, "Man, you know you can't talk to a white girl. You know, oh man, you can't do that." I'm like, "What is going on down here? Like, what is going on?" And that's how it was. They're like, I'm from the country. You don't do that. You don't go into the woods with white people when they're drinking because they'll have a good time, and it's not the same good time you want to be. Like, there's just different ways to move through the world. But I think for me, I think there's there's the box that we're told and told exists, and I want to push out and venture further outside of the box and illuminate these stories and bring it back towards to people so that they can grow and see themselves in different characters and different stories and have a connection, because we're all one at the end of the day.
Yeah. You know, and another thing I liked about your film was you included Jimmy's wife, Edwina, at the end there, how important she was to it. And you don't see that a lot with coaches' stories. Talk about your decision to make her a part of the story. Edwina has passed away a few years ago, but that was a very touching part.
I love Jimmy, and I remember going to his house the first time I met him, and we were there, and I was taking pictures of all the trophies and things in his living room, and a lot of the B-roll, it's just us filming because he had so many pictures, so many different things. And then I remember I saw a picture, and I was like, "What else is important for me?" And he said, "Make sure you get my wife." It was very quiet and meek how Jimmy is, and I'm filming it, and I'm seeing, and then he had brought it up the next day when we were filming. And then I asked him when we were doing the interview on the train, and it was the last question I asked him. I asked him all the stuff, and we did about 3 hours of interviews on that train. And I asked him, so what does Edwina mean to you? And boy, he just fell apart and broke down. And I'm like, man, this man has gone through Jim Crow. He's gone through so much adversity in his life. He's been blocked and negated from having something that he deserved for 35 years, 36 years. And then you mean to tell me the one thing in his life that can make him cry is this woman. It's the strength of a woman. The strength to support his backbone. I was like so touched. And I came away from that. I hugged him and we got in the car and he's like, "Make sure you have my wife in there." I was like, "Okay." And then I just made a promise to him. And like we were talking about in the edit, we're like, it doesn't really flow, but it's so emotional we can't not have it. And I was like, it is its own sequence. And I sat and I remember I came home from that trip and I was sad because I don't have a girlfriend. And I'm sitting there like, I've had
You don't have a girlfriend yet.
right now. I'm sitting there like I had shingles a couple months before I did it, and I was having back problems. And I'm like, there's no one rubbing my back. There's no one taking care of me right now. And it was emotional for me because I'm like, he had someone that was worth crying over.
Yeah.
Well, I hate to say, excuse me, Tom, I'm sorry, but Ozahan, that part actually brought tears to my eyes when I watched it. I lost my wife 2 years ago at the end of this month to cancer. And the story and the way you presented it, it was a parallel to my situation. And this lady was a presidential appointee in the Clinton administration. She served in the Army. Phenomenal DOD executive, and to lose someone like that is so close to you, and my only point of telling you that is the raw emotion that it elicited from me. I don't know if that was your intent, and it wasn't necessarily a bad emotion, but I got tears in my eyes when I got to that portion of it, and how you actually ended with her.
Yeah.
It's just that is just so powerful. And if I were in my philosophy class asking my students to write about that, imagine all the great things that we can write on. Okay.
Yeah.
The end is the beginning.
Right.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And you mentioned, let's slip in a plug for our friends, Rob Menzies and his daughter at the Aberdeen Carolina Western Railway. You were able to find an old train for some of those interviews. And it turned out Rob Menzies was a Michigan State grad, and he was happy to clear the path for you to do a lot of the filming there. Talk about why you wanted a train to be a part of the filming.
Menzies was so great to us. They stayed late for us. They pulled out the trains on the track, and going in early, I wanted to do this motif of, like we talked about, the Underground Railroad, but at the same time, I think it has a good moniker, but at the same time, it does devalue the real Underground Railroad to a certain extent if we were to lead with it and lean too hard into it. So I felt a little uncomfortable leaning too far into it, but I do understand, like I talked to Jimmy about it, and he's like, yeah, there was a lot of Black people from the South, and it was a pathway for people to change their lives and go to school and different things like that. So it was I thought the visual representation of it meant so much, to be able to shoot on this train and do it, and it just looks so gorgeous. I mean, they have these time periods from all over the country, and I think some of them from different countries, and they brought these trains and they keep them up to date and polished and clean, and we got to tour them. And I remember I was FaceTiming Jimmy because he went to go scout, and he's like, whoa, man, he was like a kid in a candy shop, just like smiling, looking at them, talking to them. So it's like, it was really great to be able to hop on those trains. And when I make films, I look at, like, what are different portals for us to hop back and forth through time, to hop in and out through different emotions. And it is a portal. It is a form of transportation that can get you to a place. And we did shoot at the train station in Fayetteville, and end up at the train station at Michigan State. So, like, that was this locomotive that's taking us back and forth through time. It is a emotional and, like, visual motif within the film. Whether we said it or not, it is embedded in the root of the film.
Yeah, and I wrote a little story about that. People can read it on my website, tomshanahan.report. So we'll have Herman bring us home here with final thoughts like usual. But first, I want to say to you, Osahan, if you're ready to make the leap to the big screen as a movie producer and director, I have a writer out in Hollywood who's just started to shop a script based on Ray of Light. So that's out there for you. Herman, your final thoughts.
Yeah, well, Osahan, I spent a few years as a professor at West Point, and professors are teachers. And I want to just commend you for being a phenomenal teacher, and your classroom is the world, and the ability that you have to influence people, make a difference in their life, have them see life in such a way that in the end, what we're about is trying to make this world a better place to live. And what you did with this film certainly did that. So I commend you, and I hope to have an opportunity to meet you in person one day. I've got a son your age. He graduated from West Point in 2010, played football. I'd love to get you guys connected, because what it's really about is that next generation. And I often talk about the difference between networking and networking. I know you know me, and boy, what can I get out of it, right? It's transactional. And I believe in a concept called connecting. And that's where we have a relationship with people, and we do things for and with them, not necessarily to get something. We do it because we want to. And when you have a connection with someone, you develop a very, very deep relationship. And those are the things, if you want to know the truth, that have made me very successful in business. Establishing relationship becomes my network, not that I network in order to get something. So with that, I want to just thank you for what you've done, and we'll follow up after this, and I'll get you connected. Two of my sons both went to West Point, and they both went to Duke for their MBAs. And one's still in the military now. The other one is knocking it out of the park in sales for Microsoft. And my third son is, and they all played college athletics as well. And my third son is in sales with American Express down in the Miami area. So I'd love to get you connected to those guys. And, you know, your network and connections, more importantly, becomes theirs. And that's the way you make all of this. And by the way, my connections are your connections now.
Yeah. I'll call up Emma Smith and be like, yeah, I'm at Herman Bulls, like, you know.
If you want to meet Emmett, we can certainly make that happen.
Yeah, it'd be great. It'd be great. I mean, I'll definitely, you know, we'll talk it, we'll chop it up. But it's been an honor and it's been a pleasure to be on this podcast and meet both of you guys and talk with both of you guys about this and so much more. It's really, thanks for even considering me and taking the time. I know you guys are both busy, so I appreciate it a lot.
Okay, well, this will be on Twitter, so look for it. And then it will always be on my website, tomshanahan.report. Visit my website. You can read more about the true stories of college football integration, led by Duffy Daugherty and Michigan State and Jimmy Ray and Bubba Smith and all those other players. And you can also buy Ray of Light off my website. And my next book, The Right Thing to Do, which on the very first page has a quote from Barry Switzer saying, "No one did more for college football integration than Duffy Daugherty." That's my hard story to sell, but I'm going to keep at it. Thanks for watching, and we'll look for you again on our next episode.